You're listening to the Fresh Hell podcast. Fresh Hell contains stories of a disturbing and often graphic nature and is intended for a mature audience. Please don't let your kids listen to this, or they might turn out like us.
I'm Michael Ojibwe, host of Invisible Choir, a true crime podcast that explores the most heinous murders through investigative storytelling and primary source audio. We'll take you on an unforgettable emotional journey to the crime scenes themselves as we explore the individual and community impact behind some truly horrendous and often preventable crimes.
They slammed the kid on the ground. They're stabbing their baby out here in the middle of...
They're stabbing their baby? Yes, he's dead on the ground outside. And they're yelling.
With 911 calls, police interrogations, and actual recordings.
I shot my wife in the temple of her head. I thought I killed her. And I put her in the freezer. When I checked on her at night, she's not dead.
These are the stories of the victims of under-investigated crimes, their voices crying out in unison from beyond the grave, for they are the Invisible Choir. Download Invisible Choir today on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen.
Welcome to Fresh Hell. I'm Annie in snowy Boston.
And I'm Johanna in Vienna, and you just heard the promo for Invisible Choir. And I'm so freaking excited to present this podcast to you because I'm a huge fangirl. I hope the host Michael is not already super annoyed by me because every time somebody on Twitter or wherever asks for a podcast recommendation, I always tag Invisible Choir. It's so good.
I'm sure he's not mad at you.
I hope so. It's also heartbreaking. I don't even know which episode is the best. Maybe the boy in the cupboard or the spider web. See, I just can't decide. So please do yourself a huge favor and check out Invisible Choir. And please tell Michael we sent you because he's the best. It's amazing, really.
Really? How are things in Massachusetts? You're about a week after your surgery and you've been feeling okay so far, right? Yeah. Surgery went well and I've actually not needed to take any opioids after this surgery. So I was able to just use cannabis edibles to manage the pain, which has worked out so well. I know there are people here listening that have to deal with chronic pain and opioids. And I used opioids regularly literally for years and years and years. And they just never made me feel well. That whatever that thing is, that feeling that people get that makes them say like, oh, I hope you get the good drugs. Like, I don't get that. I just get nauseous. And then I need to take Zofran and then that makes me dizzy. And so I've just been really thrilled using edibles. It's been great.
So, but everything is healing properly.
Yeah, it is. Everything was done laparoscopically, and my post-op appointment is next week. I think the hardest part has actually been I'm allergic to adhesive tape, so I've got hives where there was tape over stitches. I'm so itchy and constantly changing clothes because I have this weird thing where I'm honestly, I live in pajamas like 90% of the time. I only get dressed if I'm leaving the house and going somewhere where, people would notice that I was wearing pajamas, but I have awake pajamas and then asleep pajamas. And so I'll put on my specially designated sleeping nightgown when I get into bed. And then I get up in the morning and I change into the PJs that I'll wear to eat and drink and get dog hair on. But I don't want those pajamas in my bed. So those are my awake pajamas. I'm a weirdo.
Pajamas are literally life. I'm the same. I'm wearing a pajama right now. Why the hell would I wear uncomfortable clothes at home?
Exactly.
As soon as the door closes, off come the outside clothes. Philip, my husband, he would wear a shirt, like a dress shirt and nice pants for a suit at home.
Oh, my dad does.
While sitting on the couch watching TV. Also, I think I mentioned before that I'm the weirdo in my slightly posh neighborhood who wears pajamas and onesies to walk the dogs or to go grocery shopping because I just don't care. I don't.
No, I'm totally the same.
All right. But now I'd like to know, what do we have for our listeners this week?
All right. Well, let's get into what we're all here for, which is murder. So today I'm going to tell you about just an absolutely brutal double murder in England that's known as the Towpath Murders. As always, we're going to link to all the sources, but some of the main things that I used were the website crimeandinvestigation.co.uk, an episode of the show Murder Map, Maps, which is on Netflix, bits and pieces of a medical legal journal article from 1956 that I couldn't bring myself to spend $50 on to read the whole thing, dozens of snippets from newspapers.com, and of course, there was a book called Surrey Murders by John Vanderkiste. I think it's Kiste, K-I-S-T-E, which I actually think was the main source for murder maps.
See, I never got into murder maps. I think I tried 2 or 3 episodes. Maybe I'll give it another chance one of these days, but I don't know. It was just like, maybe not for me.
Some of the episodes are more compelling than others, I think.
Any warning for our listeners today?
Well, we're going to talk about rape and murder today of 2 young women, best friends who lost their lives to an absolute monster. And it happened right about the same time as Queen Elizabeth's coronation. And I've been actually really wanting to tell this one for a while. But yeah, just the usual. That's an awful thing to say, isn't it? Just the usual rape and murder. Nothing too bad. Oy. All right, but first, a little history. So picture it. England in the spring of 1953. It was, to say the least, a simpler time. The song at the number 1 on the charts was How Much Is That Doggy in the Window? You know that one, Johanna? I do hope that doggy's for sale.
Like you would ever ask for the price of a doggy.
I know. Just give me that doggy in the window as I pull out my big gun. Because this is America. No, sorry. I'll take all the dogs. All right. So, but yeah, How Much Was That Doggy in the Window was at the top of the charts. And the rationing of candy that had started during World War II finally ended. There was a lot of rationing at the time, of course, but I'm going to just be honest and say that candy would have been the one I was most vested in. And I've got the thighs to prove it. What else? 1953. Gas in the United States is 29 cents a gallon. In the UK, it was 5p a liter. Evidence of the Blitz was still everywhere. And, you know, even today it still is. You'll see these beautiful towns and cities in England, and then there'll just be this heinous-looking utilitarian building, and I immediately wonder what sort of charming edifice once occupied that space, you know? It's a bummer. But I think Coventry, where my late husband went to university, is one of the worst, just concrete everywhere. But I imagine there's plenty of that in your neck of the woods as well. I know Dresden, of course, but also I think Berlin and Hamburg, were hit pretty badly, like London.
Honestly, they did an amazing job here rebuilding all the old buildings. I'm more concerned about the modern steel and concrete building style things that pop up everywhere at the moment.
Ugh. Yeah.
But as far as reconstruction after the war, I think Austria had the huge advantage that bombing here only started in 1943, so that was relatively late. The first district was hit hardest, which is the historical center of Vienna.
Of course.
But Stephansdom was intact. But they did good, rebuilding everything here.
That's nice. That's nice. You can't immediately tell what's, post-war. So, but yeah, war ruins everything. So, okay, less than 6 months earlier, that previous December 5th through the 9th in 1952, that was the Great Smog, which is a pretty famous event. If you are a fan of The Crown, like both of us are, then you might remember this event being portrayed in Season 1, Episode 4, which is called Act of God.
I think that's my favorite episode. I had always just heard about the Great Smog, but I couldn't really picture it. And, it's insane how long it lasted. You just can't imagine anything like this.
No.
I think some people refer to it as the Great Fog, but this was not only fog.
No. And London is, of course, known for fog. I love fog, which is good because I'm from Cape Cod, which is very foggy. And I asked my mother-in-law if she remembered this event. And of course she did. She turned down the wrong road and almost rode into the fire station thinking it was her home. Because you just couldn't see anything. This was a very different kind of fog. It was toxic, and it was sort of more of a Stephen King style fog, and a lot of people died.
Yeah, so what happened with this particular fog was that it lingered and it grew. There was no wind and the air was absolutely full of toxins. They were being emitted from all the coal power plants in London and the surrounding area.
Oh, yeah. And of course, most homes in the UK were heated with coal at that time. Plus the coal, as you said, from power plants, and it was winter, so there was just so much pollution going into the air.
Yeah, but it wasn't moving out to sea and blowing away as it usually does. It hung in the air. It would look like nighttime in the middle of the afternoon, and you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. You couldn't see across the street.
I can't even imagine it. So people and animals died in the thousands, hit by cars, of course, or just suffocated, because anybody with any sort of lung issues, asthma, any kind of breathing issue, you were just completely fucked. And at the time, they said they thought that about 3,000 people in London died as a result. And 3,000 people is awful. But it was later changed, and they now believe it was more like 12,000 people died during that 4-day event. And the infuriating thing is, it wasn't even the first smog event of its kind at that time, and there had been plenty of similar events in the Victorian era.
And in The Crown, I think they mentioned Donora. That's in the US, right?
Yeah, so I have some notes on this because I just rewatched this episode of The Crown, and they do mention Donora. So 5 years previously, in 1948, I found an article about this entitled, quote, "Museum Remembers Donora's Deadly 1948 Smog." It was dated Tuesday, October 21st, 2008, and was written by Don Hopi for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Quote, "Located on a horseshoe bend of the..." Now, I did look up how to pronounce this after getting Piscataqua wrong. It's the, and watch, I'll probably get this one wrong too, Monongahela River. The pronunciation of rivers will be our downfall. But Donora produced steel wire and nails, zinc bullets, and star athletes, and the fluoride-laced killer smog that eventually led to the study and regulation of air pollutants. In the November 1948 Life magazine on display, Dr. Bill Rongaus, Rongaus, so Rongaus, maybe, a Donora physician, labeled the tragedy, quote, "murder from the mills," end quote, and said that if the smog had lasted another evening, the number of deaths could have topped 1,000. The inversion finally ended on Sunday afternoon when a rainstorm blew through the valley, just hours after U.S. Steel shut down its zinc smelting operations. As it was, hundreds were evacuated, and 1/3 of the town's 14,000 residents experienced health problems or were hospitalized. A decade later, the town's mortality rate remained significantly higher than those of neighboring communities, end quote. So that smog event killed 20 people during the event itself, but it's honestly impossible to know how many people it ultimately claimed. And it took days for the companies causing the smog to shut down their businesses. It lasted for 5 days. Can you imagine how many people might have been saved if they'd stopped production sooner? It's just... yeah. So there is a museum dedicated to the smog event if you're in Donora and want to learn more. The upside was, of course, that the Great Smog of Donora and London helped to create the Clean Air Act in both the United States and the United Kingdom. And honestly, it's pretty shocking. Have you ever seen those videos they show of the old buildings before and after they were cleaned after the Clean Air Acts went into effect? Filthy. They were so filthy. Really satisfying videos to watch. I'll find some to post.
I see that in the city center with the Stephansdom, the cathedral. Mm-hmm. And our air here is pretty good. But they start cleaning it, and once they are done, they can start back from the beginning because it takes so long, and it's the air is still from all the pollution so dirty.
It's amazing, isn't it? And it's still a huge issue everywhere. It's an issue here now because we're getting rid of all of our clean air regulations. Okay, so the smog has passed. You can buy candy again, although there's still plenty of other rationing going on. Oh, fun fact about that, Queen Elizabeth, she saved up her rationing coupons in order to buy the fabric to have her wedding gown made out of ivory silk for her November 1947 wedding. So people from all over the UK sent her their rationing coupons, which all had to be returned because it wouldn't have been appropriate or probably even legal for her to have used them, but I just thought that was so sweet.
It was a nice gesture. You know, I think people loved the wedding because the war had come to an end and it was something positive, something nice to look forward to.
Happy, exactly. And we love her because she took a dog on her honeymoon. Susan. Susan was her first corgi, and it was a gift for her 18th birthday.
Do you know the story about her and the stalker incident?
Yes.
The man who shimmied up a drain pipe and he went through a window, and I think Elizabeth woke up, which is nightmare material, a man standing in the... And I think he was dripping blood because he had cut himself while he was breaking into her bedroom.
I know. I can't even imagine. And she just had the wherewithal to just talk to him. I guess she just chatted with him for a while, right? Until one of her footmen woke up and then, got the guy out of there, and hopefully he got on some meds. But I can't even imagine. Like, she's a tough cookie, that Queen Elizabeth. I like her. All right, so our story takes place when Elizabeth, who had been Queen of England since her father George VI passed away in early February of 1952. I don't know if we want to talk about him a little bit.
Her father, well, it's interesting.
It is. Just watch the King's speech.
Exactly. He was the subject of the King's speech with Colin Firth. And I guess we all love Colin Firth.
Yep.
And the King's speech not only taught us about the history of King George VI, but also that doctors prescribed smoking for all kinds of breathing and speaking problems. Like you have asthma, you have a sore throat, you are stuttering. Great, here's a pack of cigarettes for you. And it's sad because King George would ultimately die from lung cancer and coronary thrombosis.
Yeah. It's awful to say that I wished I had been a smoker back when, before you knew it was bad for you. I've stopped now, but I miss it. And those were the carefree days. But I love that film so much, and I love Colin Firth. And they're actually very graphic about the lung illness in The Crown. But yeah, her dad was basically forced onto the throne when his older brother, Edward, the heir, got into bed with the Nazis and a twice-divorced woman.
An American divorcee.
Yes, an American. The worst kind of divorcee. Because, she's loud and does crazy things in bed. But yeah, the divorce was not allowed in the Church of England, and the monarch was the head of the church, so...
Yeah, no pretty young American Nazi-loving divorcee for the King of England.
Nope.
I think there are rumors that we are talking about Wallis Simpson, of course.
Wallis Simpson, yeah.
She did have an affair with von Ribbentrop. I don't know if there's any truth to it, though.
Oh, I think there was. Yeah. I think she had her finger in all sorts of pies, so to speak. But that's one of my favorite rumors. He sent her like 20 carnations every day, right? Like one for, hang on, let me look this up. Hang on. Okay, yeah, sorry. 17 carnations. 17 carnations. One for every night they spent together. Can you imagine?
I don't like carnations.
I actually don't mind carnations. It's just, how creepy would it be if every day some guy sent you a carnation or a flower for every time you had slept together? I think that's creepy. I don't think that's romantic. But yeah, so Edward, he couldn't just Henry VIII himself out of this issue. It just wasn't going to happen. And so he abdicated and he gave up his right to the throne in order to marry Wallis Simpson, royally screwing over his brother and his family over in the process.
Literally.
Yeah, literally. But his brother did a very nice job leading the country through the Second World War, and his daughter, now Queen Elizabeth II, she was a driver and mechanic during the war, and she was now a young queen with just a staggering amount of responsibility. So... all right, it's Sunday, May 31st, 1953, and the coronation of Queen Elizabeth was only a few days away, coming up on June the 2nd. And London was absolutely packed with tourists who were looking forward to the royal party to come. The weather was beautiful, and young people were camping all up and down the Thames. So just another quick river note. I want to take a quick moment and let people know. Do you remember there was that meme a little while ago about how don't make fun of somebody who's mispronounced a word because they learned it by reading? So this might be one of those situations. The Thames looks like it should be the Thames, Thames, and it's pronounced Thames. Okay. I just remember when I realized that, I was shooketh. So in any case, lots of people were out camping by the Thames. It seemed like this was a really common form of amusement at that time, and that was certainly the case in Teddington. Plenty of people were camped out in the undeveloped areas around the Thames near the locks. A lock is a device that's used for raising and lowering boats and ships between stretches of water that are different levels on a river and in canals. So you literally open a door, bring your boat into the lock, the door shuts behind you, and these doors are watertight, and then the other one opens so that you either go up or you go down with the water to traverse a canal. So I've got a video I can post of us using one when we rented a canal boat on the Severn once, which was such an enjoyable day. I really hope to do that again someday. And then, of course, the biggest one we've ever done was the Panama Canal. I'm a fan of locks.
Yeah, I think because you're like me, you'd live on a boat if you could.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. But yeah, people were happy. The weather was beautiful. And there was just a general feeling of celebration in the air ahead of the coming coronation. So another fun fact about Teddington. Sorry. According to Wikipedia, which I'm now using as a source, aren't you proud? In 1940, the Teddington Lock was the assembly point for an enormous flotilla of small ships from the length of the River Thames to be used in the evacuation of Dunkirk. I'm just going to keep throwing historical TV and film references your way, listeners. I'm sure one or two will resonate. All right. There's a really pretty suspension bridge over the lowest non-tidal lock on the Thames, which is the Teddington Lock. I'll post photos for all our bridge enthusiast listeners. So it seems that during this time, in the 1950s, Teddington was a working class neighborhood, but it seems that today it has some of the most expensive home prices outside of central London, and it is close to central London. Now to the really bad stuff. I think I've given you all of the historical information I possibly can, and now let's talk about the murders. So, 16-year-old Barbara Songhurst and 18-year-old Christine Reed, they were best friends who had grown up together. Both came from good, loving, hardworking families. Barbara was working as an assistant to a chemist. And Barbara was also about to appear in a bathing beauty pageant that was going to be held over by the Lock and Footbridge on the 5th of June. This was going to be part of the sort of week-long coronation celebrations happening all over England. But that was still a few days away. It's very difficult to find information on either of these girls. I believe they both had siblings. Christine certainly did. Her very pretty grave marker says so. And I know that Barbara had at least one brother, but it's just hard. All I know for sure is that I'm sure these families are still grieving this loss today.
Researching our episodes, I came to find that often it's easier to look up or to find information about victims from much older cases than from the cases from the 50s and 60s, at least here in Europe. I don't know if it was just a different mindset, a more conservative mindset, or if families just wanted, they didn't want to give the information to the public or the media, probably.
Sure. Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. And it's one of those things where it's like, I'm almost tempted to try to find a living relative and say, please, tell me what was her favorite ice cream? What was her favorite book? Tell me something she was terrible at. I just want to know more about the victims. I want to know more about who they were, because so often we have all this information on the murderer, right? Because we want to understand. So we can give you background on the murderer, but not on the victims. Whereas I think we all agree that we care more about the victims.
I think our listeners know that if there is information about the victims, we give it to them.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. But all we really know is they were both just really lovely girls. I don't know. I'll post a picture. There's one picture. There's not that many, but Barbara looks more outgoing. She looks tall. I don't know if she is, but her posture makes her look tall. And she's very slim and she's got lovely dark hair. And Christine, she looks a little bit more shy. And she's just got this gorgeous thick head of hair cut into the cutest haircut. I'll post the only photos that we really have of them. But suffice it to say, they were both happy, lovely, good girls. And this is awful. All right, May 31st, it was a beautiful day, and like so many others, Christine and Barbara were heading down to the then rural area around the Teddington Lock. Barbara was going to stay at Christine's that night. They had spent all day riding their bikes on the towpath that ran from Richmond to Teddington, and they'd stop and chat with friends they'd encounter along their way. They knew 3 boys who were setting up their tent by the river, and they spent a lot of the day with them. The girls had gone back home to Christine's family's house for lunch and then come back out again. And then they'd also gone home for tea, which is another word for dinner or supper in England. And then after that, they came back again, leaving the Reed house after dinner at around 8 p.m. And then from that point on, I think they were just having a really good time with the boys and stayed out until around 11. And then they left their friend's campsite on their bikes headed for home. The boys are a little bit worried about these girls traveling alone at night, and they do loan the girls a flashlight, and they walk them to the path, watching until they vanished from view. The boys were right to have been worried. A man had been scaring women on the Surrey side of the river. So just a week before, on May 24th, a schoolgirl from Claygate, she was 14 years old, and we're going to call her Kay to protect her privacy. She was walking her dog on Oxshott Heath, which is about 8 miles from Teddington. A guy on a bicycle came up behind her, hit her in the back of the head with an axe, dragged her into the bushes, and raped her. She had told the attacker that she was only 14, But sadly and unsurprisingly, this did not affect him. When she reported the incident, she also remembered that he had a cleft chin, and she reported that he had a meat cleaver.
Wow, this is almost identical to what happened in Austria between 1951 and 1957 with a guy whose name was Alfred Engleder. But he didn't use a meat cleaver. He used a heavy hammer, one of those hammers that is used by stonemasons. Other than that, same MO, like coming from the back with a bicycle.
Oh, wow. I don't know that one.
I was actually thinking about covering it one of these days, but I don't know if there's enough there.
We'll see.
Let's see. Okay, so back to our case now. With the description, could they find the attacker?
Yeah, so she was able to give them a description, and we're just really glad that she survived her attack. I sincerely hope she went on to find some happiness. But, well, and she was able to give information to the police, and it did become helpful not too far down the line there. So, yeah, this guy was out there. He had, there was I keep wanting to say sex pervert. I've been listening to How Much Is That Doggy in the Window too much. Like, look out, there's a sex pervert on the loose. But yeah, they knew that there was somebody out and about who was up to no good. But the girls really didn't have that much to worry about riding home together in the dark, right? There were other people out. There were people camped out. I mean, it's not like it was this incredibly desolate, isolated place. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The next morning, June 1st, about 8:15 a.m., something was spotted floating in the Thames about 2 miles downstream from Teddington, near where St. Catherine's Convent in Twickenham is today. And it was the body of 16-year-old Barbara Songhurst. She had been struck in the head with an axe, which had caused a wound to her cheek, and she had 3 deep stab wounds in her back. She had also been raped by what the pathologist at the time called, quote, an expert rapist, end quote.
Wait. An expert rapist. What the fuck is an expert rapist?
I know. It took me a while to figure that one out, but I was able to find part of this medical report online that I mentioned in the beginning. So, according to an article in the Medical Legal Journal from 1956 titled The Towpath Murder, The Medical Aspect by A. Keith Mant, who has an MD, BS, MRCS, and LRCP. I'm not sure what those last 2 are, but in this report, it says that at autopsy, her underwear had been torn apart at the crotch and then were up around her upper abdomen. Like, I think her underwear was like up around her chest almost, while her slacks were in the right spot, even though they weren't fastened, and she was wearing a blouse. So it essentially looked like she'd sort of been undressed and then hastily redressed before being thrown into the Thames.
Okay, so what they mean by saying expert rapist is that it looked like it was a person who had already done something like this before.
Exactly. Yeah, just phrasing it in the most disturbing way possible. You know what I mean, though? Nobody's like, oh yeah, he's an expert rapist. Like, it's just an awful way to describe it. Yeah. He also noted at autopsy that she was alive at least long enough for the cut on her cheek to have sort of bled and dried a little bit, because otherwise it would have washed away as soon as she had gone into the water. I suspect, and again, this may be just what I'm hoping, that first blow to the head knocked her out and that she never regained consciousness. It seems her lungs were punctured by some of the stab wounds in her back, and those had been made with a very large, sharp knife. The police that were called to the scene, they found the actual crime scene pretty quickly. Yeah, there was blood splashed around on the ground by the Teddington lock, on the path, and there were pools of blood on the ground and splashed over flowers. Later on, they heard from different groups of, I think mostly young men that were out camping, that said that they had seen some of that blood earlier that following morning, but they all assumed that someone had just cut their foot. Unfortunately, that was not the case. The police then found 1 pair of women's shoes and then another pair in a different size, and they were scattered in some of the undergrowth.
Yeah, so it was obvious that there must be 2 victims.
Exactly, and it makes sense that they were undressed. Like, I think he took their shoes off to attack them. But they didn't know yet it was Barbara. They didn't know who they had, and they just knew they were probably missing a second body. So Detective Herbert Hannam of Scotland Yard was in charge of the case. Herbert, who was known as Bert, was from London. He was apparently always well-dressed, and according to murder maps, the press and colleagues called him the Count. Yeah. And so, as I said before, at first they didn't know who the girl they found was. And I read newspaper reports about how police went house to house on both sides of the river, on the Teddington side and on the Surrey side, to see if anyone was able to identify a girl who had been wearing a yellow tartan blouse, blue trousers, white socks, and black shoes. But I never found anything about how exactly they were identified, but I'm sure it was heartbreaking. Within a few days, though, they knew that they had recovered Barbara's body and they were searching for Christine. So police launches set up and down the river. They dragged the river. The riverbank was scythed. So there were a bunch of cops out there with scythes. Those, Grim Reaper looking instruments, hacking back all the vegetation, trying to find the murder weapon. Hannum had the lock emptied. This was usually done in the fall to inspect the bridge and make any necessary repairs. This time the police walked through the mud. They used landmine detectors from the war, trying to find anything metal, as well as their own hands and feet to sift through the disgusting, the river bottoms are never nice. And they just found a bunch of mostly discarded junk and boat parts, trying to find just any object that would have been sharp enough to have left the wounds found on Barbara. They found some scissors, but they were not a match, and they had no luck. Hannum said that he would keep searching. The next day, June 2nd, Coronation Day, arrives. It's pouring rain. My wonderful mother-in-law remembers camping out overnight in the rain with her sister Pat at the head of the mall to try to get a good view of the procession. I think my husband's Aunt Pat was really into the royals. And she also remembers hearing that Hillary had just conquered Everest while being dripped upon from the hats of some Canadian Mounties that were standing right in front of them. It's funny, these memories. I'm just amazed at the memories older relatives have. Also, on Coronation Day, Christine's bike was found, but there was still no sign of Christine herself, and there was no sign of Barbara's bike, which was actually never recovered. On Friday, June 5th, part of the coronation celebrations included the Teddington River pageant. So this is the pageant that Barbara had planned to enter. So it happened all over the news. Obviously, this was big news, this murder of Barbara and the search for Christine's body. This was all over the news that this had happened in Teddington, and so they were expecting a few hundred people for this pageant, and 20,000 people showed up. They were afraid the bridge was going to collapse. So 20,000 people, a bunch of nosy true crime enthusiasts, looky-loos, genuinely probably hoping that maybe a body would be found that day. I probably would have gone. I'm not judging anybody.
Same.
Yeah, so they had to call in all sorts of extra police just to try to handle some of the traffic. And there was an announcement. This is the bit that you're not going to believe. There was an announcement that kept coming over on the sound system. So there's this big pageant. It's next to a bridge. There's people all around on the bridge. It's next to the Thames. And in the water are frogmen, police divers in the water. And over the sound system, announcing over and over again, they're saying, quote, "We are not looking for bodies. We are only here for the pageant." End quote. We're not looking for can you even imagine? Yeah, nothing to see here. We definitely aren't looking for any bodies. We're just here for the pageant. Yeah, it's the most English thing I can think of apart from, have you seen that meme with a queue of people waiting for an ATM and then there's a fox waiting in line with them and people are like, what's the fox doing? And it's he's just waiting in line. It would be rude to cut. I'll share it with the group. It's ridiculous, but it's just, yeah, nothing to see here as you were, Anyhow, they didn't find Christine that day, but on the next day, Saturday, June 6th, the body of Christine Rose Reed was finally found near Glover's Island, which is less than a mile from Richmond Bridge, and close to Eel Pie Island. Her injuries were very similar to Barbara's. Christine's skull had also been fractured by what was likely an axe, and she also had 6 to 10 stab wounds in her chest, depending on your source. Unfortunately, she had also been raped. The attacker is described as being a monster who is as strong as an ape. Police think it must be 2 men out together, right? In order to have assaulted both girls, because both girls were on their bicycles.
Oh, yeah.
Unless, was it possible that someone with the ability to throw axes and knives might be in the area? Would that explain the wounds in the front of one girl and in the back of the other? So they actually interviewed local carnivals and circus acts and asked around, generally trying to see if anyone had these sort of particular skills, but that inquiry came up empty.
Oh yeah, it's good thinking though.
Right? On June 12th, there was another attack. A 49-year-old woman who we're going to call Pam. She was from Englefield Green and was walking her dog in Windsor Great Park when she was stopped by a young man on a bike who asked directions to the Holly Tree, which was a local pub. So she's happy to help, and she's she's kind of turned away from him and pointing the direction he wants to go, when suddenly he puts a hand over her mouth and forces her into the bushes. And he shows her a large knife and tells her he knows how to use it. So she cries out and says that she's just had major surgery, and that actually stops him. And so instead he, quote, asked for a little kiss, end quote, and stole 17 shillings and change from her purse, warned her not to scream for help, and hopped on his blue bicycle and rode off.
I'm honestly astounded that the surgery thing stopped him, but then again, there are often accounts from survivors of similar attacks, and it seems like sometimes it's a very little thing the victim says that stops the attacker.
I know, it's unbelievable when that happens, isn't it? Yeah. And she was able as well to give a good description of the man, which did in fact match the description that the young girl who had been assaulted had given. A very strong young man on a blue bike with a cleft chin. So the press were being given twice daily police briefings. They were covering everything. The News of the World has a $1,000 reward for information, and a local schoolmaster comes forward. He's been following this case in the news, and he tells police that on a Sunday afternoon, a couple of weeks before the murder, he's walking along that towpath and he comes across a guy who is wearing nothing but shorts and shoes and using the trees as target practice, throwing both knives and an axe. So the schoolmaster, who's named Ray Tarp, asked if he could have a go throwing the knife. And he gives it a try, but I think it landed in the water. He was awful at it. Yeah, I don't think knife throwing is easy. So this was such an odd occurrence that, of course, he remembered it, because you would, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
He also remembered seeing that the man was, okay, so this guy was apparently also climbing trees using only his arms and then swinging from, I know, and then swinging, look, Mom, no legs, and then swinging from branch to branch easily. And he was very strong.
I'm sorry, I don't want to laugh, but what? He was just randomly aping his way through the woods?
Yes, he was good at aping.
Yeah, that's something that you would remember.
Right? You would. Absolutely. I feel like even I would notice and remember that kind of shenanigans. Like, just so strange. All right. So, I mean, today, if it happened, there'd be 1 million uploads onto the Insta Twitter. Yeah, so I get the impression that what we now know about this person is that he was definitely not very bright. He was certainly smart enough to know right from wrong. I'm not making any excuses based on diminished intellectual abilities here, but I think he just got a lot of satisfaction and pride from his physical ability, from his strength and his axe throwing, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, listen, if I could climb a tree, if I was one of those like ninja warrior motherfuckers climbing trees with just my fingertips, like, yeah, that's something to be proud of.
But he didn't use it for good.
Exactly. He didn't use his powers for good. All right. So on June 17th, a man sees a man that he thinks matches the description of this attacker. And so he calls the police, who pick up the guy. And this man's name is Alfred Charles Whiteway. And he is picked up for walking aimlessly in Weybridge, which is about 11 miles away from the scene of the attacks.
Wait, he was picked up for walking aimlessly? You're not allowed to walk around aimlessly?
Well, I read it either that he was picked up for walking aimlessly, or that when he was picked up as a suspect, I think, in this case. But when he was picked up, he was walking aimlessly.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, and that was in Weybridge, which is about 11 miles away from the scene of the assault. So all of this, it's, on a bicycle, 11 miles is not that far. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just been, honest to God, it's been such a long time.
No, that's easily manageable.
Yeah, okay. So Alfred Charles Whiteway is 22 years old, and he's taken to the police station where he's searched but found to be unarmed. And he behaved well during the interview, and he didn't raise any suspicions. Far from it. So Barbara's family actually knew him. They called him Alf, or Alfie, and her brother, I think his name was Danny. And Danny was married to a woman named June. And June, who is Barbara's sister-in-law, had previously dated this Alfred Whiteway years ago, and he was just known pretty well by the family, and no one thought he was remotely capable of hurting anyone. I think he might have even lived down the street from Barbara, so he knew her whole family, and they all said, no, it couldn't be him, although he was quite fond of knives. But he was released, and he was even offered an apology for having been picked up. let's talk a little bit about Alfred Whiteway. He was born in London in June of 1931. His mother was, I have a domestic servant, so probably a housemaid of some kind, and his father died of cancer when he was 14 years old. He was in trouble with the law from a very young age, mostly theft. And he had been sent to a reform school near Swindon in his youth, and the headmaster at this reform school described him as being cruel to animals, lethargic, and foul-mouthed.
He sounds like an absolute dreamboat.
He sounds like a catch. It seems like he had 8 brothers and sisters, and he was very poorly educated. He had done some time in prison for theft in 1948, and when he got out of prison, he got a job as a laborer. His co-workers would later describe him as very strong, and they said that he liked to scale scaffolding using only his arms. So again, with the arms. And he had a real obsession with knives. Apparently, he was really, really good at throwing knives. He could hit a matchbook throwing a knife from like 30 yards. Crazy stories.
What's a matchbook?
It's like a, how big is it? Small. You open it up and there's like 20 matches in it.
Oh, like a matchbox.
Yeah, but you can get boxes and books.
Oh, the ones that you fold up. Mm-hmm,
yes,
I got
exactly.
it.
Yep. Okay. His wife was a girl named Nellie who caught his eye one day, and he followed her home and started hitting on her, and they fell in love. I mean, I'm kind of surprised that worked. He started stalking her and hitting on her, and boom. But yeah, she absolutely loved him, and her mother fucking hated him. So they did what any sensible young couple would do. They intentionally got her pregnant so her parents would be forced to let her get married. But after the wedding, he didn't earn enough to actually get them their own place, so she still lived at home with her parents, and he just was not allowed in the house at all. So they had sex in the alley by her parents' house, as you do. So in May 1953, they had a child under age 2. And I know I have information on the child, like I know the child's name and sex and all of that, but I don't want to get into any of that because it's not their fault that their father was a monster. And another baby was on the way because of all the alley sex. Whiteway, he lives with his family, siblings, aunts and uncles, and they all live together only about a mile away from the murder site. Whiteway says his uncle can confirm that he got home from his wife's house just before 12, before midnight. On all the programs I've seen and things I read, he comes across as both not very intelligent and also very badly educated. So you get the impression that he can't read. It's not good. And I think generally you can manage if you've got one of the two, right? So if you are intellectually handicapped but have the benefit of a good education, then there's things that you can overcome. And if you are intelligent but have very poor education, again, you can overcome that. But if you're missing both, you're fucked.
It's difficult, definitely.
Yeah. I'm not giving this guy any excuses at all. It's just he doesn't come across as the sharpest tool in the shed. So he's brought in, like I said, by the police on June 17th. He's questioned and let go, and they apologize. The following day, June 18th, a police officer was cleaning patrol cars in the Kingston police station. He finds an axe shoved underneath the rear seat of one of the police cars. I know his name, but I'm not going to say it because I'm just going to instead say this guy was a fucking moron. I mean, everyone makes mistakes, but this one is big. It's huge. He never asks about the axe. He just tucks it into his work locker at the station, and then he goes on sick leave for 5 days. So he got the flu and lost his mind because apparently he comes back to work 5 days later, and not only does he not ask about this axe that he's got in his locker that he found in the police car, once he's back at work and sees it's still in his locker, he's like, oh, I could use an axe. So he brings it home and uses it to chop kindling wood.
I have to say one thing. If you work as a police officer and you find an axe in a police car, back then, you didn't think it would possibly be something important, I guess. I hope. So let's say best case, he just stole police property.
I mean, in best his mind. Case. Literally the best case. Because even if we give him the biggest benefit of the doubt, he's still stealing police property, right? But of course, it's much worse than that. We all know where this is going. That axe was hidden by Whiteway when he was brought in by the police. So the arresting police had also fucked up. They hadn't searched him properly. They didn't notice the axe in his overalls before they put him in the back of the car. And they didn't notice him hiding it under the back seat. I don't know who these people are or how they got their badges, but this is pretty, I don't know. All right. So Hannum, he still doesn't know about this axe. I think this was a completely different precinct, different police station. But he does not like Whiteway, or he likes him for the crime. He thinks he looks good for it. So he has him arrested again. And this time, Whiteway admitted to the violent rape of the teenage girl earlier that year, but says he has nothing to do with the murder of the two girls and claims whoever had done that would have to be completely mad, wouldn't they? They just, that's the quote you see over and over again. They'd have to be completely mad. If you murdered someone, you'd have to be completely mad. And Whiteway, again, he swears he was with his wife until 11:30 and got home at midnight, and she gives him the same alibi. But now, of course, Whiteway has been implicated in a few sexual assaults and attempted sexual assaults and held by different departments and his knife skills. So let's talk about his knife skills. So this is from an article on crimeandinvestigation.uk. It was written by Richard Bevan. Quote, he could split a matchbox from 30 yards. But another far more important fact came to light when it was revealed that Whiteway could hit a chalk line on a tree with a hatchet from up to 40 yards away. When asked where the hatchet was that he threw at trees, Whiteway replied that he kept it in a cupboard at home. But despite a thorough search, the police found nothing. Incredibly, when Detective Hannum asked about it again, Whiteway admitted that the Kingston police had it after he had pushed it under the seat of the police car when he'd been picked up at Weybridge. End quote. So, police rush over to the station at Kingston and they finally sort out what had happened to that axe. The axe that's now very blunted and covered in the fingerprints of the police officer who took it home. The police now know what weapon was responsible for cracking open cheekbones and fracturing skulls because it matches the wounds on the girls perfectly, which is just awful. So when they put the axe on the table of the interrogation room where they're holding Whiteway, he just explodes in anger that the axe is so blunted. It's clearly his axe.
Well, he does have his priority straight.
He does. Yep. Yeah. And then Hannum tells Whiteway that they found some blood in the suede of his shoe, just tiny traces of it in the eyelet and in the seam of his crepe-soled shoes. They were also known as brothel creepers. I'll post a picture of them. They're like thick-soled shoes. I don't know. They're kind of punk. I think they became a thing again in the punk era. But anyway. And Whiteway's like, wait, was there really blood? And they're like, yeah, there's really blood. And so he confesses. Or does he? So, according to police, he gave them a very detailed confession, claiming he only saw one of the girls and was surprised when her friend started screaming, so he, quote, nipped over and shut her up, end quote. This also fits with campers out there that night. There was only one, it seems, group of campers who heard one very quick scream and then nothing. It seems like maybe he threw a blade at her and just hit her quickly, because other campers in that area, including the boys that the girls had been with most of the night, they did not report hearing anything. They said that they heard nothing amiss, just the usual sound of people, sort of traveling along the towpath. The police think that he stopped Christine with a blow, but didn't realize that it was two people together, and then he saw Barbara, and she recognized him, and then that's why he killed both of the girls. And that's certainly possible, because his other victims weren't killed, but it's also just as possible that he was escalating.
Definitely, yeah. So what was the defense for him? Did they just claim insanity?
Yeah, insanity, but they also claimed that Whiteway was tricked into signing his name onto a blank paper, and that the police then wrote out the alleged confession that he never made afterward. So this is called being verbaled, and it's when somebody intentionally misquotes someone when writing like the transcript of a verbal statement, and that can certainly happen, but if you're being verbaled, it's like it means it was done intentionally, that you were set up. Problem was nothing was recorded. It certainly was possible at that time, but recording confessions, recording in police rooms didn't become common practice in the United Kingdom. This surprised me until 1991.
That's late.
Yeah, it surprised me. But they had the testimony of Hannum and the other officers that were there that day. They all insisted that they had heard the confession, and there was just so much trust in the police that the papers actually posted articles kind of shaming the defense for even calling the police's honor, I guess, into question. His wife was also very emotional. She testified that he was definitely with her at the time of the murders, drinking tea on the back steps because, of course, he wasn't allowed in the house. But the jury didn't buy it. They thought his wife was too emotional to be a reliable witness, which I think is probably right. I'm not sure. I feel bad for his wife in all this. I think she's another person that just got taken advantage of by him. And so did the jury. They didn't buy it. So after 6 days of trial, on November 2nd, after 45 minutes of deliberation, the jury found Alfred Whiteway guilty. An appeal was heard and rejected on the 7th of December. And on December 22nd, 1953, Alfred Whiteway was hanged for his crimes at Wandsworth Prison. The axe is at the Black Museum and Scotland Yard, which I haven't been to yet, but it's on my list. And that is the incredibly tragic story of the murder of Barbara Songhurst and Christine Reed. So yeah, please say a prayer tonight or raise a glass, light one up, whatever your thing is. Please do it in honor of these really two bright, beautiful souls who were just taken far too soon.
Thank you. Never heard about that. It's shocking to me how similar this is to the Austrian case.
Oh, now I really want to hear the Austrian case.
Yeah, and it was around the same time.
Yeah, it's just so sad.
Mm.
It's so sad. So please tell me something good.
Okay, so my something good this week. Well, I'd say this was a very British episode.
I'm such an Anglophile.
We've been talking a lot about the Crown and King's Speech. Of course, nothing is more British than tea, the Queen, and the Beatles. I don't know if I ever told you, I love the Beach Boys. They're my favorite band in the world.
Yes.
And up until maybe 10 years ago, the Beatles were my favorite band. Like, as a teenager, I seriously only listened to the Beatles. I still love them. So much. Therefore, my something good and recommendation of this week will be the Danny Boyle movie Yesterday from last year, 2019. That movie shows that a world without the Beatles would be a little bit sadder. It's a super lovely, feel-good movie, and yeah, go check it out.
I really want to. No, I really want to see that. We just watched, which I think you have seen, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which I think might be my new favorite Tarantino film.
Really?
Yeah. I don't want to give any spoilers away. I really loved this one, which is funny because it's another, is it a spoiler to say it's sort of a revisionist history film like Inglourious Basterds? But I liked it more than Inglourious Basterds. Yeah, I really loved it. And I could see why Sharon Tate's sister, it's like, I think it's the only film or something that she's been pleased about. And I could understand why. I also, how many times have I recommended The Crown now?
No, you didn't. I did it twice now.
Oh, well, now I'm recommending it. So now we've both recommended it, and now you have to watch it. It's required watching for this podcast. Also, the film The Queen, if you're interested at all in sort of that part of history. I thought The Queen with Helen Mirren was absolutely, that's a classic, isn't it? And The King's Speech. And Pride and Prejudice with Colin Firth. All right. My last UK program suggestion is Call the Midwife. It's all about London during the times we've sort of talked about. And it's just the most beautiful program with the most wonderful actors. And every episode makes me laugh and cry. I love Call the Midwife. So please watch it. Keep watching it so that they'll keep making it. And yeah. Thanks so much for listening again.
Please follow us on Instagram, follow us on Twitter. If you want to, if you feel like it, please leave us a review on iTunes. That really helps us out.
Yes, absolutely. That would be great. If you have something nice or constructive to say, we always want to hear it. Please come join our Facebook group, Fresh Hell Murder. We'll help you find that.
Yes.
And is there anything else?
Please say hi to your dogs. And cats.
Oh, please do.
And bunnies.
Say hi to everybody. Who has the wallaby? One of the Hellions has a wallaby.
Yeah.
We really need more wallaby photos, please. I demand it. But yeah, as always, until next week, if you're going through hell,
keep going. Tschüss.
Bye.